Hello and welcome to Send Me. My name's Becky and a decade ago I started a missions organisation called One by One. We do lots of different work all around the world. We run children's homes in Kenya, we run a safe house in Pakistan where we've managed to pull children out of slavery. We also run 7 sewing centres across Sri Lanka and also an initiative called the Dignity Project that helps girls all around the world at risk of human trafficking. Over the last 10 years, we've watched God do some incredible miracles. All he's longing for is that we say yes, that we would be willing and available. In Isaiah 6:8, God comes and he says, "Who can I send? Who will go for us?" And the prophet's response is so remarkable. He immediately says, "Here I am, send me." And that's my prayer for me and for you today, that we too would have a heart that says, "Here I am, send me." Well, over the last few weeks together, we've been looking at lots of different principles that are very much required if you're going to have a send me kind of heart. So we've been looking at how we have to have perseverance for the call of God. When sometimes life throws interesting situations our way, are we willing to still run with what God's put in our hearts? Or are we tempted to lay it down because it's just a little bit too hard and it's just a little bit too difficult? We look at how God comes with his protection and his provision on our lives when we're walking out in his plans and purposes. We've also looked at different character traits that are necessary to have a yes cry. Things like boldness to stand before pharaohs in our lives as we faced intimidating situations to move in with the kingdom of heaven. And today I want to look at another character trait that I believe is crucial into opening doors, and that's humility. I want to look today at a hero of mine in the Bible. I love the little hidden nuggets in the Bible that you could easily miss, but actually hidden in there are incredible and powerful truths. And today's hero that I want to focus on is one such person in the Bible. So let me read to you from 2 Kings, and I'm going to read from chapter 5 and the first few verses. It says this: "Now Naaman, commander of the army, the king of Syria, was a great and honourable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valour, but a leper." Let me just pause here for a second. Sometimes there are buts over our life in terms of we are great in certain areas, but we may fail in others. Maybe people have said things of you of, well, you know, they're a great person, but, well, they're not really great at this or that. I think the one over my life is, well, she's okay, but her cooking, you want to stay clear of that. And for Naaman, the thing that loomed over his life was he was a leper. You can tell this must have brought a shadow to the whole household from how it's even worded. He was a mighty man of valour, but he's a leper. And sometimes labels can be placed upon us and it's almost like it holds us back. Like, yeah, she's great and all, but, well, this really goes against her. But let me encourage you today. I don't know what that label is on your life, but I do know when you hand it over to God, no matter what that failing or that flaw or whatever it is, maybe it's something from your past that you still keep making your present situation. When you give it over to God, he's able to wipe it away. He's able to use you, and you are a mighty man. I think of Gideon, who at the point where the angel comes and says, "You mighty man," he was actually in hiding at the time. And you know, God sees who you really are. He sees who he made you to be. The world may see your failings and your flaws, but God sees who you are always destined to be. So lean into that. Okay, let's carry on. Verse 2 of 2 Kings 5 says this: "And the Syrians had gone out on a raid and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, 'If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy.' And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, 'This and this is what the girl who is from the land of Israel said.'" Let's skip down. The king ends up writing a letter to send on with Naaman to go get prayer from the prophet. But let's skip down to verse 9. It says this: "Then Naaman went with his horses and his chariot and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean." But Naaman became furious and went away and said, "Indeed, I said to myself, he will surely call on the name of his Lord, and he would wave his hand over the place and heal the leprosy." He goes on to then say, "Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than the waters of Israel? Could I not at least wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in a rage. And his servants came near and spoke to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" Are you not thankful for people who are going to speak truth to you in your life? For those moments, we've all had moments like Naaman. It's easy to point the finger at Naaman, but I think we've probably all had moments of, "Whoa, I didn't think it'd look like this. This is not how I expected the miracle to come. Thank you very much." Can I at least not wash in clean water? And we all need people who are going to come and speak truth into our life of, "Hey, now, let's just get a grip." I'm so thankful the servant did that for Naaman. And so it goes on, verse 14. So he went down, this is Naaman, and dipped in the Jordan 7 times, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. You have to love how God heals. God doesn't just do part of a job. You know, for God to bring full healing would have been Naaman's skin going to that of an aged man who was an army commander. So it would have still been rough skin, but at least it wouldn't have had leprosy. But God goes beyond, and his skin becomes so pure and so clean. It's like that of a child, smooth and fresh skin. When God does a job, oh wow, does he really go for it. And so reading this scripture, it's an incredible, incredible scripture. Let me encourage you to carry on reading that passage because it's a real page turner. Gehazi, Elisha's servant, does some interesting and foolish things. It's a real page turner. You definitely want to read it. But let me dive in because today I actually want to focus on the little girl. The little girl in this passage is easy to overlook, but she for me is an absolute hero. We know very little about this girl, but we do know she's got a strong faith. She's been moved to a faraway land. She's been taken captive and she's moved to a faraway land. But there's something about her words that people are willing to listen to. She's there serving on Naaman's wife, and she's the servant, she's the maid girl. There's something about her words. She must have been a girl of integrity because people were willing to listen to what she said. People put weight on what she said. They believed her. And what I love about this little girl is she simply comes and she's doing her daily chores, she's helping out, but she notices a shadow over the household. And so she said, well, if you could just get to Elisha. And this little girl, she's been forced away from her family, taken by force. She's still young. She's taken captive. She's taken to an unknown land. But her faith in God has not been shaken. This little girl's got such a strong faith that she knows if the master could just get to Elisha. Now, what I find intriguing is if we skip forward to Luke chapter 4 and verse 27, it says this, verse 27, this is Jesus talking, and it says, "And many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them were cleansed except Naaman the Syrian." So, based on what Jesus has said, no one's been cleaned of leprosy by Elisha or through Elisha except Naaman. So at the point where this little girl says, if my master can just get to Elisha, he will be healed. Not he could be healed, not he might be healed, he will be healed. At the point of her saying that, Elisha's not actually ever healed anyone before of leprosy. Her faith in God is so solid and so secure that she puts her own neck on the line, knowing he will be healed, even though she's got no evidence to back that up. She's never seen it happen before, but she so trusts in God. This little girl's got a faith that I long for. She's got a faith that I long to push in on my life for, to have a faith to know that something will happen, even when I've not necessarily got the evidence to back it up just yet. And sure enough, everybody's impacted by this little girl. The wife's impacted by her. Naaman's impacted by her. Naaman then goes to the king and he's impacted by her. And then Elisha, the prophet himself, is impacted through this little girl. Next, we know she's a slave. She's a Hebrew girl who's been taken captive. She's forced away from everyone that she knows and everything that's familiar and taken to an unknown land. That must have been incredibly daunting for her. I know I've worked with people in Pakistan who are now trapped in bonded labour, and I've met families whose children have been removed from their family and taken to another brick factory. Oftentimes, brickmasters will own multiple brick factories around the country. And so people can get moved from one factory to another. And sometimes the children are split up. Not always, but we have met families whose children have been taken off. We met one family who their teenage girl was actually taken by the brickmaster into his own home, that she might be his servant. I won't even go into any more detail of what that entails, but I think you can imagine. And the fear that surrounds these families who are trapped in slavery, it breaks our heart. The injustice of it just causes me to lose sleep sometimes. You know, it's sometimes you need to be irritated enough to do something about it. I think sometimes the temptation when we live in the West is life's comfortable, life's okay, and you know, whatever we tolerate will continue. But sometimes it just takes me or you to be irritated by injustice enough to say, okay, here I am, send me. And I don't know what I can do. I can't necessarily fix the situation, but I want to do something. I want to challenge you to press in, just like this little girl did. She pressed in despite the fear, despite her being in an unjust situation, far away from everything that felt familiar. But she pressed in. You know, by comparison, this little girl was everything that Naaman was everything that this little girl was not. Naaman was a man, firstly. He was a strong army commander. He was a mighty man of valor. He had influence and power, and he had freedom. By comparison, this little girl, she's female, which in that day and age gave her very little influence as it was. She's a child, so who's even going to listen to her? She's also a slave girl, taken away, all her freedom gone, no human rights whatsoever. This little girl's marginalized and enslaved. And yet God uses this exact little girl to bring life and to bring hope. Next, we find out that the little girl, she simply speaks up. You know, a few years ago, I had a friend who had witnessed a car crash, and a man had been driving very recklessly and ended up killing an innocent person as a result of their driving. Well, my friend was a witness to the whole event, and he said when he went to court, he had to give testimony about what happened that day. The other person who was killed obviously couldn't give an account for what happened. And had my friend not spoke up, had they rushed off from the situation and left the scene, we don't know if justice would have happened that day. But because my friend gave testimony in court, the reckless driver had to face the consequences of his decisions that day. And the truth is, my friend just spoke up. They just said what happened. And oftentimes, just speaking up is all it takes. Sometimes we hold back because we don't know what the situation's going to look like. For this little girl, she didn't know what the outcome of speaking up would be. I mean, Naaman was not known for his patience. Scripture says he was angry when Elisha didn't even come and talk to him himself. He sent a lowly messenger to come deal with him, and he was angry about that. And then the next verse says he went off furious. So Naaman's quite clearly got an anger problem. He's got quite the temper. And this little girl would have undoubtedly have seen that over the time of working for them. And she could have thought to herself, I'm not going to speak up because, well, what if the miracle doesn't happen? It's my neck on the line here if it doesn't happen. If I've spoke up and then it doesn't happen, is he going to think I was making a fool of him? But she doesn't do that. She simply speaks up. And in doing so, a miracle comes. So what do we know about this little girl? Other than the fact she was a young girl who's taken captive, she's got a strong faith and she speaks up. Other than that, what do we know about her? Absolutely nothing. We don't know exactly how old she is. We don't know even what her name was. And we never get to find out what happened after Naaman received his miracle. Does she get rewarded in some way? Is she allowed to return back home to her family? We don't know. Scripture never tells us. But what can we learn from this incredible girl? Naaman may have been the one that was a mighty man of valor, but for me, reading this account, the little hero is the girl. She's the mighty one who opens the way through her heart of humility and compassion, opens the way to bring a miracle for Naaman's life. Naaman almost missed the miracle because of his arrogance and pride, but because of her humility, the door is opened that Naaman may receive a miracle. And I believe that key is true for us, that as we walk out with compassion and humility, we open doors in order for God to come and move in the most powerful of ways. Well, I want to look at a couple of lessons that we can learn from this incredible hero. The first one is that she has this heart of compassion. You know, she has every reason to not speak up. She could have thought to herself, well, actually, if my master passes away, then, well, maybe I'll be released home. Maybe if Naaman's died, I'll get to go back to my family and everyone I love and everything that I know. She has every reason to not speak up, and yet she does. She puts Naaman before herself and she speaks up with such love and compassion. If he could just get to the prophet. She recognizes the shadow looming over this whole household, and her humility and compassion brings the light into that household. You know, I shared with you a couple of weeks ago about Leonard, a little boy who was desperate to bring the gospel to the very person who abused him. And I see that again and again and again in my own children, where time and time again, they're desperate that the people who used to abuse them, the people who used to beat them black and blue, might come to know Jesus. And that challenges my heart. I see the love of Jesus Christ radiate through their lives, and I want what they've got. I want what this little girl had got, to have such a heart of compassion that you're constantly putting your neighbour before yourself. The next thing that we learn from this little girl is that she didn't in the natural have authority to speak into this situation, but her humility brought about an influence that was way beyond her level of ranking, as it were. So Naaman's an important military leader. Naaman is so important, he has direct access to the king. Yet by comparison, here's a slave girl. She's got no human rights, she's got no level of influence whatsoever, no authority whatsoever. And yet through her humility, she's able to have influence in an authority level way above her station. You know, my kids in Kenya, because I live in England, when I first started my home in Kenya, my kids would often say to me, can we call the Queen? And I would always be like, oh, don't have a number on me, sorry. And they would be like, what do you mean you don't have her number? Of course you have her number. Well, when was the last time you had tea with the Queen? And I'm like, oh yeah, never. And they were always like, but you live in England, of course you've had tea with the Queen. And the reality is, I may be a daughter of the king. However, I'm yet to have tea with the Queen. You see, there's protocols in place. Yes, I'm a British citizen, but I don't get to just walk up to Queen Elizabeth and say, hey, do you fancy tea together sometime? There are protocols in place. There are situations and protocols with people in authority that you can't just barge in. And this little girl was the same. There was protocols in place. This little girl in the natural didn't get to have authority over Naaman, didn't get to have authority over the king or over the prophet. And yet through her humility, the door is opened and she has influence in a realm and a sphere way above her ranking. I honestly believe the same happens with us. That when we move out and our only agenda is compassion and the love of Jesus Christ, I believe doors begin to open so that we can have levels of influences in spheres way above our station, as it were. I had the joy a couple of years ago of speaking in Parliament all about human trafficking and period poverty and different things connected with the Dignity Project. And what a joy to speak into government about such important issues. But the truth is, it all happened because I had compassion on one mum years ago whose little girl had been trafficked herself. And often if we go in with the mentality of, oh, I want influence, or I want power, or I want authority, then it's not going to happen. But if we go in and our agenda is to love, watch the doors that God will open before you. Just as God opened incredible doors with this little girl, I believe he'll do the same with you and I. Now I'm applying this principle with brickmasters in Pakistan. Naturally speaking, I have no influence. These people are very important people. They're very wealthy. They're very powerful. Many of them are very connected on a government level. And these are important people. But I want to come in and bring freedom. Just like we shared a couple of weeks ago with Moses facing Pharaoh. I want to see these families and these children set free from slavery. But to go in and for my team to go in and face brickmasters, we need to go in low. We need to go in with a heart of humility and compassion. And as we do that, we're seeing doors beginning to open across Pakistan. We have the joy of working in 50 brick factories now. 50 brick factories where the brickmasters have given us permission to come in and do Sunday school, to teach about the love and the power of Jesus Christ. That only happens through humility. We're now across the brick factories building sewing centres as well. My heart is that if we can help these precious women trapped in slavery to learn a new skill, then maybe they can start micro businesses. And with their micro businesses, they can chip away at the debt that's now binding them in this bonded labour. And maybe if we can teach them a new skill other than just making bricks, we can teach them how to sew. You know, many of the people living in these brick factories have never had one day of education. And my heart's cry is that actually over the coming years, we'll begin to build schools in the brick factories themselves. Now, at this point of me saying that, that's an impossible situation. But you know what? We've faced quite a few impossible situations before, and God's always made a way. And so I'm believing for schools across brick factories in Pakistan where we can educate these beautiful people, both the children and the parents, teach them to read and write, teach them new skills, teach them practical skills so they can launch micro businesses. And we've already begun that with sewing projects where we're teaching the women how to sew, how to make clothes that they can sell in the marketplace to begin chipping away at this impossible debt that looms over their life. And we're watching God open door after door after door, and it's blowing our mind. We just simply keep saying, okay, here I am, send me. We'll say, yes, God, and let you do the rest. The third thing we learn from this beautiful girl is that maybe your heart of humility and compassion brings the miracle for other people. It's not necessarily about your own life. Maybe you're still dealing with certain situations. For this little girl, as far as we know, she was still trapped in slavery. But because of her humble heart of compassion and humility, God brought a miracle for someone else. Now that's what it really looks like to love your neighbour. If you really want to follow the commandments of God, that's what it's going to cost you. To say yes to Jesus is really going to cost you. It's going to cost you your time. It's going to cost you your finances, may even cost you your health at times. It's going to be inconvenient at times. But that's what it takes to really love your neighbour well. This little girl, for me, is an incredible hero. And she constantly puts others before herself. What a challenge that is to me and you. Finally, I want to say to you, I don't know what the context of your field is. Maybe your missions field is the workplace. Maybe it's the marketplace. Maybe it's in the media industry. Maybe it's in politics. William Wilberforce, now there is a sent one. I don't know what your mission field looks like, but I do know there's a field for every single one of us. For this little girl, her mission field was her master's household. Maybe your mission field is your own household, to raise your children well, to love your husband well. Well, let me encourage you, go for that with a heart of compassion and a heart of humility, and watch what God will do in and through your life. If God can use a female child slave to bring influence to an army commander, then I know for a fact He can use you to influence your unsaved husband or your work colleagues, or to bring hope and life to your neighbours too. Well, I want to show you this quick video from Sri Lanka, and it's of women out there who were widows, who'd lost all hope after a brutal civil war. But after launching 7 sewing centres across the north of Sri Lanka, we've watched hope be restored. A little similar to what we're now doing in Pakistan in teaching these ladies to sew. We've been doing that for a little while now in Sri Lanka, so watch this. In 2015, Matthew and I came here to Sri Lanka and started a project with the widows and their children after the war had so affected their lives. We started a feeding program for them, and as a result we've seen hundreds of them who were once Hindus and Buddhists give their hearts and lives to Jesus Christ. So many times it says in the Bible that Jesus' heart was stirred for the widow, and he began to move our hearts for the plight of the widows in the north of Sri Lanka. We met one lady who shared her story with me, that her husband had tragically been killed in the war, and one day the army began to invade her village. She grabbed a hold of her twin babies and ran out to try and escape her life. She got across to a ravine that was very long and very deep, and she got halfway in when all of a sudden her arms began to tire. She knew that if she tried to carry both her babies across, she would probably lose them both, but if she could just hold one of them, then maybe that baby had a chance at life. She had, in that moment, had to decide which one of her babies she had to let go of. And the hopelessness in her eyes at that moment as she began to share that, you could see almost the guilt on her face as she didn't know if she'd done the wrong or the right thing. And as we began to share the love of Jesus, watching hope being restored in her life was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. In August 2017, we built our first sewing room. Some of our widows are little old ladies, but equally, some of them are young mums, and they want to be able to provide for their own families themselves. The sewing room enables them to be self-sustainable, and watching that grow and extend is so exciting. We now have a total of 7 sewing rooms, and watching hope being restored in Sri Lanka is incredible. What a joy to watch hope be restored in these beautiful widows' lives. If you've been moved by anything I've shared today, then please check out the website. You can see lots of information all about our sewing centres in Sri Lanka or the work we're doing out in Pakistan. If anything's moved you, please get in touch. We would love to hear from you. Maybe you can help support one of our ladies in the sewing centres. Have a look on the website and have a look how you can give or how you can be involved, as we'd love to have you come and join us in loving our neighbours well. You can also pick up a copy of Embrace the Journey from the website, where you can read in far more detail lots of the different work we're doing across the world, including how we ended up in Sri Lanka, because even that is an incredible and miraculous story. So make sure you pick it up and have a read of that. Well, as always, it's been such a joy to be with you today. I hope you'll join me again next week when we'll be looking at the power of faithfulness and sensitivity in our life, and how God longs to use that in order that we can really catch the full load that He's got in store for our lives. So you don't want to miss it. I'll see you then.